this is something that I really do try to accomplish in a lot of my games, and it's actually been a small point of stress when it comes to designing my sessions as a DM is whether or not my players will be able to see this for what I've intended it to be, or they're going to choose to skip it or something like that. And one of these, we can bring this back to an example from Blood in the Valley, my mini campaign, which was I had a statue that was broken, and the statue was basically the hint of where people were supposed to go, but it was broken. So what do? Oh, well, some players came up with like really good ideas, but it was nothing as to what I had intended. Because I was hoping to flesh out the nearby town before the players had actually gotten to the next big, exploration part of their campaign. So one of the options from one of the players was to try and rebuild the statue. And in my mind, that wasn't an option because it was broken the way it was, like extremely broken. The only thing that was remaining was this arm that points in a certain direction. I think that was a point at which I realized that it didn't matter what I had like planned for this particular statue. It didn't matter that, my clues were my clues that I had developed to ultimately lead them to the correct answer. They didn't go to waste, because next time a party might not choose to do the things that this party chose. So it can be useful to have those if they decide, hey, let's go back to town or something. It's about facilitating the players' ideas for how to solve a puzzle. So Tomb of Annihilation comes to mind. The module itself has a lot of preset outcomes and clues and methods to resolve the puzzle. But sometimes, if the players aren't seeing what you're seeing, that can create frustration. And so it's important to allow the players to explore those options, in some cases through the roll of the die. So I could have said, normally you would need like a lot more, glue or something to reconstruct this statue, but I'll let you roll for it. So maybe you'll luck out. Maybe you'll be able to at least put a little bit together to get the idea of what it's pointing to. That could have been a much better way. Instead, I ultimately had to resolve it by a Deus Ex Machina, which was one of the characters was a warlock, so they had an archfey patron. So I had the patron step in and say, as the patron recalls, this statue used to point in this direction. But so my point is that I totally get that, and I can also see that it is a learning process to create these kinds of breadcrumbs for the players to follow and act upon. Because, like John was saying in our discussion earlier, it's great to have a great idea, but if you don't have a great execution, then it's, a great idea doesn't mean anything. I also wanted to backtrack a little bit to our discussion on mythology, because that is something that I value really highly in my world. I'm not saying that I have a lot of great mythology that is super in-depth and there's all sorts of things, because sometimes you just need the bare bones of it to create it along the way. There was something here that Adam mentioned about the etymology of certain places or things, creatures even, that their names usually mean something. In Norse mythology, you have certain spirits like the Skogsrå, which it means forest spirit or forest vasen, and it is actually this particular one is a woman who has a hollow back, like a tree stump kind of, and she is trying to lure you into the woods to your doom, essentially, so she can kill you. And so we were talking about what kind of values different mythology would bring out of society. No, let me say that again. We were talking about the different values that mythology represents of society. In this case, it's don't go in the forest at night. Because there's bears. Everybody knows there's bears. Everybody knows there's wolves. But even worse, they're spirits. Spirits, because what does it mean if you get spirited away by one of these skogsrå? Well, it means that nobody could find your body. So that's probably one of the things that you could take for an example alongside the kappas. People drown in the river, nobody could find your body, must have been the kappas, you know. And I really like things like that, because in D&D, you can bring those to life. You can make them actual things. You can make them actual events that happen. I think that by allowing your players to also participate in the creation of your mythology, you are expanding your world even beyond the normal limits of what it could be, because you're just one person. You know, 5 heads are better than one, as it were. And so I think that's one of my favorite things, is whenever I'm presenting this mythology to my players, and they have, you know, characters that live in the world and have lived in the world for their whole lives, they must know something too. So why not have them add to it as well?
To jump right onto that, I find that this is really a great example of organic world building, because I'll present this idea of, like, you have this, you know, this forest that's the forest of vehemence, and then we have people who go, well, what does vehemence mean? And but I might have partially constructed the things that they would interact with. There's a whole bevy of will-o-wisps, and what are will-o-wisps, and where will-o-wisps what are they, and why are they there? And that's the big question that really becomes the problem solving of the party. They could try to navigate this forest and then run into a whole bunch of the willies and have to deal with them. And they could just, you know, kill them all, send them back from whence they came. But if they're agitated spirits, then they'll just come back. And would it be more interesting, especially for this party, if I know that they're of the explorative type and they really want to delve into answering those questions and trying to make the world better in some way? They will go into detail about, well, why did that happen? And what are these, we'll call them willies because it's hard to say the word here, will-o-wisps, the willows. What are they doing? And what I'll do with this in particular thing is that when they would see the willows, they would but they would defeat them, or they get really close to them, they would turn into the face of the spirit that they once were. And then that face has a connection to the lineage of the world. And they would discover a village, and in this village, a ghost town, and there's all these gravestones at the thresholds of all of the buildings. We start to understand that all the willows are the spirits of this town, except all the graves have been desecrated. So now the easy connection there for me is, okay, they just need to fix the gravestones, and then the spirits can be put to rest. But then they started asking other questions. What desecrated it? Would it happen again? And me as the DM, I went, I didn't think about that. But in the moment of that improvisation, and in the moment of the players and the characters giving interest and ideas, we started to formulate, what is this darker entity that maybe has gone through and torn through in this sort of like a calculating, meticulous way to upset all these spirits, to then understand that we've created this bevy of willows. And that created a theming moving forward of, there are these places in the Feywild that are beautiful and wonderful, but have been now corrupted somehow by some other entity that is roaming the landscape. This was intentional, but the players thought of that, and the players helped stoke the fires of that narrative that then drives this forward. And that's what was brilliantly energizing for all of us, where we all like collectively went, could it be that thing that we've been seeing here and there? Could it have done this? And I started planting clues about you see pine needles. That has always been a running theme for that creature in this place. You see the residue of this, and you get visions of these things when you touch this thing, and it's suddenly we're all together on this story, whereas this sort of random side encounter of something, a wrong that was done that can be changed, is now connected to the overarching narrative based upon the input and the interests of the players.
Thank you so much for listening to some of our podcast highlights. This podcast is part of the Darkmoor Podcast Network. If you want to support the content creators, feel free to visit our Patreon. And please, game responsibly.